Off the bat, comparisons to dystopian novels and fiction like 1984 are evident. A world where fiction and imagination are outlawed, and even the idea of something else happening that isn't actually happening is frowned upon. Steve Lyons, the author of this novel, is much like Jacqueline Rayner and Justin Richards, a writer of past Doctor Adventures and Eighth Doctor Adventures before this. This is, however, technically his only new series adventure novel, and I'm really disappointed about that fact because this is genuinely, despite its, I suppose, overused premise of like just outlawed regular things like 1984, you know, obviously stuff like that, Big Brother and all that kind of thing. It's been done quite a lot, but this novel feels unique. It takes a Doctor Who stab at it, and by that I mean it basically does it in a more sci-fi way instead of having it be like a genuine, and not that dystopian novels aren't sci-fi. What I mean by that is there is an explanation as to why these things have been outlawed. It's not just an overwhelming, like, unnecessary rule that has been imposed on this population. There is a genuine scientific reason as to why these people have to live like this, and I will get into that later on. It foregoes the general introduction of these novels by having the TARDIS trio, the Doctor, Rose and Jack, already kind of on this planet. They're just sat in a diner having chips, and then they begin to notice stuff going on. They begin to notice the news is slightly odd and the people around them are acting slightly weird to how they are portraying themselves. So that's what kind of ticks them off. And unlike Winner Takes All, where it felt weird that the Doctor and Rose got on Earth and figured out basically everything that was going on within the first 40 pages, this felt fine. You know, 40 pages in, they're already trying to figure stuff out, but that was okay because we forewent the entire introduction, and, you know, I guess we didn't have to like have Mickey and Jackie there like they did in Winner Takes All. They're kind of already on this new planet, so any exploration that they do feels warranted. The main kind of premise is obviously about censorship, which is always like a prevalent thing. What can you censor? What should you censor? You know, is it right to kind of stop people from expressing themselves in certain ways, whether that be dangerous or not? You meet fiction geeks and fanatics, all spurred on by this TV personality on this secret TV channel called Static, in between the official TV channels. And then the three characters, the Doctor, Jack and Rose, all end up with three important missions, and they all kind of get waylaid in certain ways. Early on, Jack and Rose bump into this fiction fanatic who writes comics and stuff like that called Dominic, and he is our first inclination into the fact that it's not cut and dry. You know, it's not, like I said, it's not just an overwhelming kind of denial of you can't do this, you can't do that because we don't want you to. There's no dictatorship. In fact, there's no government at all, which again seems quite weird that this world is actually not controlled by government, not controlled by one person. It's technically controlled by like a hospital called the Big White House. What makes Jack and Rose realize that there's more to it than meets the eye, or at least the reader realizes that there's more to it, is Dominic just snapping mid-conversation with Jack and Rose. And he attempts to commit suicide by jumping off of the hotel balcony that they are on. He does end up surviving, and he ends up working with Rose later on. But the fact that like this kind of isn't even mentioned again, this random outburst of mania, leads you to suspect that there's more going on. So Rose's kind of story is entwined with Dominic's, and Rose ends up being affected by similar things in this world. Jack's story gets intertwined with Hal Gryden, the TV personality, and the Doctor's story is alongside this policewoman who is there to put things right. You know, she struggled with hiding away the fiction imagination in her brain when she was younger, and she has become this policewoman. She went to the big White House and she has reformed herself to be able to help other people. Chapter 7 raises the most interesting questions, with the Doctor visiting the big White House with Waller, the policewoman that he's with, and realizing that obviously she had been there before. The big White House is where the cognitively disconnected all go for rehabilitation. The Doctor comes to understand what is going on in this world, but he doesn't yet understand why. In fact, the name of the planet is stated differently by different people. And that, again, is obviously what leads you to believe that there's more to it than what meets the eye. It's known by everyone as Colony World 4378978.Delta 4, but it was previously known by some people as Journey's End, or Oneros, or Discovery, depending on who you talk to, which is obviously a hint towards a larger thing. But it's finally confirmed as Arcanis Major at the end. The actual confirmation of its name isn't really relevant, but the knowledge that different people don't even know what the name of the planet they're living on. Again, I know I'm just saying there's a lot of hints towards this stuff, but you still can't figure out what exactly is going on. But even though you can't necessarily trust what is being told to you in this novel, you still believe all of these people. You believe the fiction geeks, but you also believe this policewoman has such a strong sense of purpose that you believe her as well. And you believe that everyone believes that they're doing the right thing. So it is a really difficult novel to get kind of your moral head around. So Jack befriends Hal Gryden, or at least he thinks he does, until he realizes that he's just befriended a homeless man who pretended to be Hal Gryden because he's fantasy crazy, which leads Jack to being thrown into the big White House. And Rose, after essentially just sleeping through a whole day, eventually seeks out Dominic to get more answers. But as Jack and this fake Hal Gryden is trying to introduce fantasy for fiction to the world, and how Rose ends up exploring the intricate details with Dominic and what can and can't be done, you realize that their attempts are actually making things worse. That Jack is actually creating chaos, obviously, like he normally does, but Jack is going around pubs and bars and telling all these stories, making it very dangerous for himself, but actually making it dangerous for everyone else. At the very least, it's a fool's game to be trying to introduce fiction to the masses, but it's also one of the only stories where I'm not annoyed at the characters for doing something that is clearly not helping. You know, they don't know any better. It's not so much like they could have given it some thought and been like, oh no, this isn't right. They fully 100%, like everyone else in this book, believe what they're doing is the right thing. But it's all just a massive misunderstanding, and it's due to the fact that obviously there's no government to relay all of the correct information the way it should be. What gets revealed is that fiction on this planet is genuinely dangerous. It's outlawed for a reason, and it leads the inhabitants of this planet to realize their fantasies and their imaginations. Like it creates real images in there. Well, they're not real, they're not physically real, but they're due to something in the atmosphere, right? Their fantasies and their dreams become real in their brain in real life, but they will physically affect them, right? So Rose ends up being fantasy crazy while she's around Dominic, that's what it's called, and she ends up seeing zombies from Dominic's comics, and she goes insane. She even imagines the Doctor, and the Doctor getting her into a taxi and bringing her to the big White House to make things right. But he's not even there. Like, the taxi driver's like, who are you talking to? What's going on? But it's not a hallucination as such. It's a genuine biological, like, facsimile from created through the atmosphere, these little particles in the atmosphere that are affecting the population. For example, the homeless man that is pretending to be Hal Gryden with Jack is fantasy crazy because he genuinely thought he was Hal Gryden, or at least he was so caught up in being in this story that he didn't necessarily realize until they get captured in this empty warehouse, that he was crazy. Once Rose is part of the action and Jack's kind of betrayal by this man, they end up being the center of attention, and the Doctor kind of allows the reader to figure it out themselves. I felt like I picked up on it quite early. I didn't necessarily, I wasn't 100% sure on what was going on, but it was my running theory for quite a while about this kind of knowledge that there is actually probably some reason as to why they're going crazy. It's not that it's like a 1984 scenario. It's not a dystopian future. There's like a genuine explanation for it. Rose and Jack are there to actually experience it, while the Doctor is there kind of figuring it out without destroying and making everything go crazy with the population, figuring out a more intricate way to help everyone. Whilst Rose and Jack, they see things, they're being lied to, they're making up the lies and then end up being contained in the big white house. There's actually a whole chunk of chapters in the middle where the Doctor isn't there at all, and it's all about Rose and Jack kind of figuring out things for themselves in more nuanced ways. And the most significant moment for the Doctor is actually when he is being created in Rose's imagination. It was easy to make the connection with the policewoman and this introduction at the beginning of the book with this child who sees monsters in her bedroom, that they're the same person, obviously. And then you realize, and then, well, not realize, but then you get told that she's not a policewoman. This whole facade, this whole feeling that she has, her morals and her motives have all been created by her. She's one of the very few people who's been infected kind of in a good way with her actions, but she has a boss on her phone that doesn't even work, that doesn't even exist, but she is obviously going out trying to help these people who are going crazy, these fiction geeks and stuff. And you realize that obviously she is being affected in the exact same way, that, not like everyone is in some way. And then you find out that Hal Gryden was never real. Like, don't get me wrong, it's plot twist upon plot twist, and it's kind of becomes a bit of a gimmick at some point. But this character, this Hal Gryden character, who is meant to be in the static between the channels, he doesn't exist. It's like mass hysteria that there is no person who is Hal Gryden. In fact, the Doctor, to save everyone on this planet, ends up having to become the character of Hal Gryden and transmit himself across the world and help explain what's going on, because somehow the story of Hal Gryden, the story of the static between the channels, becomes so interesting to people that it becomes real. The climax is quite massive, with the Doctor, Rose and Jack all finally in the big white house, and them having to protect the patients who come together to help fight, most of them, and the police, obviously, who are outside, alongside Kimmy, who is this fake policewoman with stolen gear and all that kind of stuff, who actually ends up being the most senior officer in this scenario. So it's really interesting, and it's a massive climax towards the end. It seems a bit weird that they would kind of get these patients, I suppose, to help fight the fight while the Doctor is trying to transmit this broadcast across the world, but it is really satisfying when you see how all these people are working together, and the knowledge of the fact that this is being done because there is no other way. I know this was not long after the Time War, but it feels quite wrong for the Doctor to be kind of using these people to fight. But I suppose, yeah, like I said, there isn't really much option. Although the Doctor does make the decision to expose Kimmy to the entire world, just so they realise the extent of how this can work, but exposes her delusions on live TV, which feels quite exploitative and manipulative, to have her weakness, which wasn't even known to herself, broadcast to the world. But I guess it works. More obviously, the main thing that I've spoken about with these previous Ninth Doctor novelizations is the characterizations of these characters, and I think this is the one that gets it the most right. Only Human did a pretty good job, but Jack was kind of sidelined for a lot of it. But all of these characters, in fact, Rose and Jack, end up having a lot more to do here compared to the Doctor, but with that being said, like they're all still kind of making decisions, kind of trying to fix things. Whether they're right or wrong is kind of obviously quite difficult to figure out. Something I read in Doctor Who magazine issue 361 is that Steve Lyons actually didn't even know that Captain Jack was American until about 2 weeks before his deadline, when the Next Time trailer for The Empty Child came out at the end of Father's Day, which was quite interesting. But I don't think that really took away from his character. I don't think him being American makes a massive difference. But yeah, this novel is almost exactly what I was looking for in a Ninth Doctor novel. It's not perfect. It has its a weird kind of plot twist upon plot twist, and the conclusion following the climax feels a bit kind of unnecessary. I felt like I predicted it quite early on, the kind of knowledge that there was actually an explanation, and it ended up just being something in the atmosphere. It was nice that it wasn't just so like straightforward, but it felt quite obvious that was what was going to happen. I would give The Stealers of Dreams by Steve Lyons 8.5 out of 10. But yeah, I mean, the characters of this novel I feel are really fleshed out. There's probably only a couple characters that aren't, but you don't necessarily have to know the backstories of every single character in a novel. So for the most part, that's why it's gotten such a high score. I am quite like strict, I suppose, with how I rate things. Basically nothing will ever get 10 out of 10. But this is quite easily the best novel, new series adventure that I've read so far. Up next, we have The Stone Rose by Jacqueline Rayner. Finally moving on to the 10th Doctor, and there is a lot of 10th Doctor new series adventures, but I've already read this book. This is a very good book, and I will be getting into that into the next video. So look forward to that. I'm really happy to have had these two really good novels back to back. But yeah, that will be done in the next video, and I will also be making a video about all of the 9th Doctor novels as a whole. So please be on the lookout for that. Thank you very much.